You keep looking at that old car in your driveway, the one your neighbor keeps telling you to trade in, the one with the worn seat and the engine you can actually see when you lift the hood. And something in your gut keeps telling you not to let it go. That instinct is right. That car is worth more today than the shiny new thing they want to sell you. And I can prove it with numbers, not nostalgia. This is not about sentiment. It is about a kind of value that was buried on purpose, back when a single man in Detroit decided that cars should be replaced instead of repaired. I found the paper trail. There is a document from the 1920s, a name almost nobody learned in school, and a shepherd's trick older than the automobile itself that can keep your car alive for another 20 years. I remember the exact night this clicked for me. I was reading a cracked 1952 owner's manual I bought for $1 at an estate sale, and on page 9 it told the owner how to adjust the valves themselves by hand with a feeler gauge. A factory manual telling you to fix your own engine. I set it down and realized how much we have quietly lost. And all of it works with what is already sitting in your garage right now. So let me open the drawer and lay the pieces out. Here is the first thing that should not be possible. The average car on American roads has never been older than it is today. According to S&P Global Mobility, the average age of a car or light truck in the United States crossed 12.5 years recently. 12.5 years. Back in the 2000s, that number sat closer to 9. People are holding on, and they are not doing it only because cars are expensive. They are doing it because something about the older ones refuses to die. Think about that for a second. We were sold a story that every year the new machines get better, safer, longer lasting. And yet the machines people trust with the most miles, the ones they keep in the driveway for 15 and 20 years, are often the older, simpler ones. That is a contradiction. And contradictions are exactly where the buried knowledge hides. Let me show you why the simple ones last. An engine from the 1980s or early 90s has maybe a few dozen electronic parts. A carburetor or an early fuel injection system, a distributor, a handful of sensors. That is it. A car built in the last few years can carry more than 1,000 microchips and dozens of small computers called control modules wired together across the whole body. Every one of those is a part that can fail. Every one of those is a part that ties you to a dealership when it does. The older machine was built to be understood. You could stand in front of it, trace a problem with your hands and your ears, and fix the thing that was actually broken. A friend of mine kept a 1989 pickup running past 300,000 miles, and the most expensive tool he ever needed was a $40 set of wrenches and a manual like the one I found. 300,000 miles. Most new cars are not designed to see half of that without a major electronic repair that costs more than the car is worth. So the paradox resolves into a simple truth. Fewer parts means fewer failures. Parts you can reach means repairs you can afford. That worn old car in your driveway was built during a window when machines were still meant to be kept. But that raises a much bigger question. If simpler cars last longer and cost less to keep alive, then why did they stop building them that way? Why did every car after a certain point get more complicated, more sealed, more dependent on the very company that sold it to you? That was not an accident. And to understand it, I had to go back almost 100 years to a boardroom and a man whose idea still quietly reaches into your wallet every single month. His name was Alfred Sloan. He ran General Motors starting in the 1920s, and he was not a mechanic. He was a strategist, and he had a problem he needed to solve. By the middle of the 1920s, cars had gotten good. Too good, from a seller's point of view. A Ford Model T could run for years and years. People bought one and simply kept it. If your product lasts, your customer stops coming back. And a customer who stops coming back is a business that stops growing. So Sloan did something clever and cold. In 1924, General Motors began rolling out a new idea, and by 1923 and 24, they had formalized what became known as the annual model change. Every single year, the car would get a new look, new styling, new trim, a new shape that made last year's model look old, even when it ran perfectly. Sloan himself, in his own writings later collected in his book, described the goal as creating a certain amount of dissatisfaction with the car you already owned. Read that again. The goal was to make you unhappy with a machine that still worked. They gave it a polite name, dynamic obsolescence. The idea that you could keep an industry alive not by building better tools, but by making people feel behind. And it worked so well that the whole industry copied it within a decade. By the 1950s, an industrial designer named Brooks Stevens was openly using the phrase planned obsolescence in his talks, describing it as instilling in the buyer the desire to own something a little newer, a little sooner than necessary. Now, here is where it starts to sting. That strategy began as styling. A new grille, a new fin, a new color. Harmless enough, in a way, because a new grille does not stop your old car from running. You could ignore the fashion and keep your machine. But the idea did not stay at the surface. Over the decades that followed, that same thinking crept deeper and deeper into the machine itself, until the car was not just styled to feel old. It was built to become harder and harder for you to keep alive on your own. And that is the shift that changed everything, because a company that profits when you buy again has every reason to make the old one difficult to save. So the small clue is solved. The reason older cars feel more honest is that they were built before the philosophy of dissatisfaction fully sank its teeth into the engineering. But the larger question now opens wide. How exactly did they turn a repairable machine into one you cannot touch? What is the actual mechanism that took the wrench out of your hand? That is where the story stops being about styling and starts being about control. Let me walk you through what changed under the hood, because this is the part that turns that old car of yours from an inconvenience into a treasure. In the older machine, information was free. If something went wrong, the car told you in a language anyone could learn. A rough idle, a certain smell, a check under the hood, and the parts were what engineers call serviceable, made to be opened, cleaned, adjusted, and put back. A set of spark plugs, a points and condenser, an air filter you could tap clean. My $1 manual assumed the owner would do all of it. Then came the sealed era. Slowly, part by part, the serviceable pieces were replaced with sealed units that you cannot open, only replace whole. The diagnostic information got locked behind a computer port that, for years, only the dealership had the tool to read. If your car threw a warning light, you could no longer trace it with your ears and your hands. You had to pay someone with a proprietary scanner just to be told what was wrong. And often the fix was to swap an entire expensive module rather than repair the one small thing inside it that had failed. This got so out of hand that ordinary people had to fight back through the law. In 2012, the state of Massachusetts passed the first automotive right-to-repair law, forcing car makers to make diagnostic information available to independent mechanics and owners, not just dealers. The people of that state voted for it overwhelmingly. Think about what that means. Citizens had to pass a law just to win back the right to understand their own property. And in 2020, they had to vote again, expanding it to cover the wireless data that newer cars send straight back to the manufacturer. You had to fight in a voting booth for the right to fix your own car. That is how far the wrench was pulled from your hand. Now stand your old car next to that. The machine in your driveway was born free. Its information is open. Its parts come apart. It does not phone home to a corporation every time you start it. It does not lock you out of its own brain. In a world that spent 50 years learning how to make you dependent, you are holding one of the last machines that lets you be independent. That is not junk sitting in your driveway. That is leverage. And if you want to go deeper than what we can cover in a single video, everything I have been building toward the first repairs that matter most, the daily habits that keep these machines alive, and the full system for owning an old car without being owned by it is laid out step by step in First Fixes, Deep Habits, and System Complete. 3 books written for exactly the person sitting where you are right now. Someone who suspects the knowledge is real and wants all of it in one place. You will find the details in the description below. And I know exactly what some of you are thinking right now, because I can hear it. You are thinking, That is fine for a man with a big garage and a lift and a lifetime of mechanical skill, but not for me. You are thinking you have never held a wrench with confidence in your life, or you rent, or you have one small space and no special tools. This next part is for you especially. Stay with me, because the most valuable things I am about to hand you cost almost nothing and need no skill at all. Here is the first one. The single greatest enemy of your old car is not the engine wearing out. Engines built in that simpler era routinely go past 200,000 miles. The real killer is neglect during rest. A car that sits, undriven, for weeks and months, quietly destroys itself in ways that have nothing to do with age. The fuel goes stale. The battery drains and sulfates, seals dry out, flat spots form on the tires, and most people blame the car's age when the true cause was simply letting it sit. So the first free method is this. Once every week or two, if you can, start that car and let it truly warm up and drive it gently for 15 or 20 minutes, not around the block. Long enough for the engine to reach full temperature, for the fluids to circulate, for the battery to recharge, for the moisture inside the exhaust and the oil to burn off. This one habit, which costs you nothing but a little fuel, does more to preserve an old car than any product on a store shelf. The people who keep these machines for 30 years are not wizards. They simply never let them sit and rot. Here is the second one, and it is almost too simple. Keep the fuel tank full, especially if the car will sit. An empty tank is a tank full of air, and air carries moisture, and moisture means rust and water in your fuel system. A full tank has almost no room for that damp air. Our grandparents knew to top off before the machine sat for the winter. It costs you nothing but timing, and it protects the most expensive internal parts you have. And here's the third, the one almost nobody thinks about. Your old car's worst season is not summer heat. It is the moment cold, wet air meets a machine that has been babied and stored. Condensation forms inside the engine and the tank and the body panels. So on a dry day, take it out. Let it breathe. A car that is used stays alive. A car that is hidden away, quote unquote, to protect it, often dies of the protection. None of that needs a lift. None of that needs a scanner. None of that needs a dime of special equipment. It needs the thing the sellers were most afraid you would keep, which is the simple knowledge of how a machine actually stays alive. And once you have that knowledge, the whole equation flips. The old car stops being a liability and becomes an asset that other people are now paying real money for, because that is the twist most folks have not caught up to yet. While the average person was told to dump their old car, a growing crowd of people quietly figured out what these machines are really worth, and they started paying for them. Look at what has happened to the value of clean, well-kept vehicles from the 1980s and 1990s. Cars that dealers were practically giving away 15 years ago now sell for many multiples of what they cost. A simple, honest truck from the early 90s, the kind with a manual transmission and almost no electronics, can now bring double, triple, sometimes far more than its price when new. Collectors have a nickname for this whole category. They call them young-timers. Not antiques yet, but no longer ordinary. And the reason they are climbing is exactly the reason I have been laying out. People finally understand that a machine you can fix, that does not spy on you, that does not lock you out, is rare, and rare things rise in value. So think about the full picture now. You have a machine that costs less to insure, less to register in many places, less to repair, and that you can maintain with your own two hands. And on top of all that, it is appreciating while every new car loses a fifth of its value the moment it leaves the lot. The thing they told you to be ashamed of is the smartest asset in your driveway. But there is still one problem standing between you and keeping that value for the next 20 years, and it is the one enemy that does not care how simple or how honest your engine is. It does not care about your model year. It attacks the old machine and the new one alike, and it is the single most common reason a perfectly good older car finally goes to the scrapyard. It is not the engine, it is not the transmission, it is rust. And this is where I get to hand you the oldest secret in the whole story, because the fix for rust, the real fix, the one that actually stops it before it eats your frame, was not invented in a laboratory. It came from men who spent their lives with sheep. Let me tell you how I found this. I kept running into the same frustration in old farming and homesteading notes. Farmers who could not afford to let a truck or a tractor rot kept their machines outside in weather far worse than most of us deal with, and yet those machines survived for decades. So how did they beat the rust when they had no fancy coatings, no undercoating shop, no modern chemistry? The answer, buried in old agricultural habit, is a substance that comes straight off a sheep. It is called lanolin, wool grease. The waxy, water-repelling oil that sheep produce naturally to keep their own wool from soaking through in the rain. Think about what lanolin does for its whole natural life. It sits on the outside of a sheep, out in the cold, the wet, the mud, and the snow, and it keeps water from ever reaching the skin. It is nature's own rust-proofing, perfected over millions of years to do exactly one job: repel water and cling to a surface without ever fully drying or cracking. And people who worked with wool noticed something. The shepherds and the wool handlers, the ones whose hands were always coated in the stuff, had soft hands, and, more to the point, their tools and their blades did not rust the way everyone else's did. That knowledge made its way onto the farm and into the workshop. Old-timers would take lanolin, sometimes thinned so it could be brushed or sprayed, and coat the underside of their vehicles, the frame, the inside of the door panels, the hidden seams where water collects and where rust always begins its quiet work. And because lanolin never fully hardens, it does something no paint can do. It creeps. It flows slowly into the tiniest scratches and crevices and seams over time, self-healing the coating, staying soft, keeping oxygen and water away from the bare metal underneath. Paint cracks and lets water in behind it. Lanolin refuses to let go. This is not folklore that fell apart under testing. This is the exact principle behind the wool grease-based rust-proofing products that professionals quietly use today. The reason your local rust-proofer can protect a vehicle so well is that the best of these coatings are built on the very same lanolin the shepherds relied on. The industry simply repackaged the sheep's own trick and sold it back to us at a premium without ever telling us where it came from. So here is what you can actually do this weekend with almost nothing. You can buy lanolin-based rust protection, often sold as a wool wax or wool grease coating, for a modest price. And on a dry day, you can get that old car up on a set of ramps, take a brush or a simple spray applicator, and coat the frame, the underbody, the inside of the rocker panels, and the lower door seams where the drain holes sit. You are doing exactly what a farmer did 70 years ago, and exactly what an expensive shop would charge you hundreds to do. The film you leave behind will creep into the seams, stay soft through the winter, and stop the one process that kills more old cars than every mechanical failure combined. And if you want to go all the way back to the source, the truest old method was simply lanolin, warmed until it flowed, thinned just enough to spread, and worked into every hidden metal seam before the wet season came. No solvents from a factory. No proprietary formula. The same grease that kept sheep dry on a hillside 1,000 years ago, protecting the frame of a machine they told you was worthless. That is the whole mystery solved. The reason your old car is priceless now is not one thing. It is that it was built in the last honest window, before the machine was sealed against you. It is that its value is climbing while new cars collapse. It is that you can keep it alive with a weekly drive, a full tank, and a coat of grease off a sheep's back. The knowledge to do all of it existed plainly in a $1 manual and in the hands of farmers who could not afford to be fooled. It was pushed aside so you would keep buying. Someone kept it alive in old notes and old habits, and now it is in your hands. So look at that car in your driveway one more time and see it for what it truly is. Not a relic you are stuck with, but something rare and honest that was quietly taken from most people and that you still hold. You are the kind of person who suspects that real, useful knowledge does not just disappear on its own, that it gets buried when someone profits from your forgetting. And every time you turn that key instead of signing a new loan, you are proving that instinct right. Now I want to hear from you, and I mean specifically. Tell me the year and make of the old car you are keeping alive. And tell me the one repair you did with your own hands that a dealership swore would cost you a fortune. Leave it in a comment right now, because the people reading this need to know they are not alone in holding on. And tell me where in the world you are watching from, because I am always amazed at how far this old knowledge has traveled. If you believe, like I do, that we are quietly taking back the practical skills that were buried to keep us paying, then come stand with the rest of us who are doing exactly that. In the next one, I am going to open up something even stranger from the archive. There was a common household product our grandparents kept on a garage shelf, something you can still buy for a few dollars, that they used to free a seized engine bolt that every modern mechanic would tell you to cut off and replace. I found where the trick was written down, and I cannot wait to hand it to you. You keep looking at that car in your driveway, and your gut is right. Inside my membership, the Old Ways Society, I take you further. The Sloan Playbook decoded and reversed on your own car, picking up right where I just stopped. And in there you can ask me your own question, and a real person answers you. Not a machine. You won't be alone. Just point your phone's camera at the code on the screen. Cancel anytime, one click.